I had kind of forgotten about him. And then there was a little article about him in the paper. And even in that, there was a veiled reference to his dislike of what I did.
Really?
Anyway, it didn't have my name, of course. He used to rail against comedians because they weren't as wild and dangerous as he was, because he sucked.
Jerry Seinfeld, the king of observational comedy, may seem calm and collected on stage, but behind the scenes, even he has his limits. Throughout his legendary career, Seinfeld has crossed paths with countless comedians. But not all encounters ended in laughter. From clashing egos to brutal punchlines gone too far, there are a select few comics that left him irritated, offended, or just plain done. So, who made the list and why? These aren't just petty feuds. They're raw, revealing moments from the world of comedy you've never heard until now. Number 5. Andrew Schultz. At last, we arrive at Andrew Schultz, the ambitious, sharp-tongued comedian who boldly aimed at Jerry Seinfeld, both behind the microphone and in countless interviews. Schultz was never shy about expressing how little he respected Seinfeld's approach to comedy. In his eyes, Jerry's material was, to put it bluntly, flat and hollow. He once described it as lifeless, easy, and emotionless. The kind of stand-up that sounds more like someone reciting a grocery list than a real person sharing what they feel. But the feud between these two comics didn't start with some dramatic showdown or an exchange of insults on Twitter. No, the roots were planted in a much smaller, almost invisible moment. Just a brief encounter in a dimly lit comedy club. Years ago, Schultz had just wrapped up a set, still riding the adrenaline rush that comes from making a room full of strangers laugh. He stepped off stage, and there, in the crowd, was Jerry Seinfeld himself, one of the most famous stand-up comics in the world. For a young performer trying to make his mark, seeing Jerry was like spotting a lion in the wild. Schultz saw a chance to introduce himself, maybe get a nod of approval, or, at the very least, a polite smile. So, with a hopeful grin, he approached Jerry. He wanted to thank him for paving the way for so many comedians. He also hoped to share a handshake, and maybe feel like, even for just one moment, he belonged among the big names. But instead of a warm greeting, or even a simple good set, Seinfeld just stared at him. He didn't smile, he didn't speak, he didn't nod. He simply turned away without a word, as if Andrew Schultz wasn't even there. That tiny moment of being ignored might have meant nothing to Jerry. He probably forgot it as soon as he turned his head. But to Schultz, it felt like a door slammed in his face. Later, reflecting on it during his podcast, he sounded genuinely frustrated. "Come on, man," he said, his voice still carrying the sting. "It takes 2 seconds to say, 'good set,' but he just looked through me." This single cold moment planted a seed of resentment that Schultz never really shook off. From then on, he began to pick apart everything about Seinfeld's reputation and legacy. Over time, his criticism only grew sharper, more confident, and harder to ignore. He argued that Seinfeld had built an entire career not on genuine feeling, but on perfect timing and neat punchlines. To Schultz, it was all a carefully arranged illusion that lacked any soul. The jokes were tidy, the delivery precise, but the heart, he insisted, was missing. Schultz went further, attacking the show that made Jerry an icon. Seinfeld, he claimed, was a sitcom that felt as empty as the stand-up that inspired it. Sure, it was clever, and yes, it was funny in its own way, but where was the depth? Where was the emotion that made an audience care about the characters? "Nothing in that show ever made you feel anything," Schultz declared. "Nothing made you tear up. Nothing made you care." He compared it to other sitcoms that mixed humor with genuine human connection, shows that made people laugh and cry in the same episode. To Schultz, Seinfeld's work was polished but cold, like a showroom car you could admire but never really drive. Of course, these harsh words did not go unnoticed. Many fans of Seinfeld, and there are millions, thought Schultz was just picking a fight to get attention. Some accused him of jealousy. After all, Jerry's influence on modern comedy is undeniable. He set the standard for observational humor and showed how a comedian could turn their quirks into a massive cultural phenomenon. But for Schultz, it wasn't just about envy. It was about feeling dismissed, being made to feel invisible in a business where every handshake and every nod can open doors. When a legend in your field won't even acknowledge your existence, it can leave a bruise on your confidence that doesn't fade easily. Over time, Schultz did admit that he might have gone too far. He softened some of his statements, recognizing that his early critiques were fueled as much by hurt pride as by any thoughtful analysis of Seinfeld's work. On later podcasts, he confessed that the encounter with Jerry had stuck with him longer than it should have, echoing in his mind every time he watched Seinfeld's stand-up or flipped past reruns of the show. Still, that moment of silent rejection remained the spark behind years of pointed commentary. It was proof, at least to Schultz, that sometimes the smallest gestures, or the lack of them, can set off waves that ripple for years. To Jerry Seinfeld, that evening in the club was likely no more than a forgettable night, another comic in a long line of hopefuls trying to get his attention. But for Andrew Schultz, it was the night he decided that respect had to be earned. And if it wasn't freely given, he wasn't going to pretend he owed it in return. Their story is a reminder that in comedy, as in life, reputation is never only about talent. It's also about the little ways you treat people when no one is watching. Sometimes, a word of encouragement, or the failure to offer it, can create a story that grows larger than any single joke. And in the end, that story can shape how the world sees you just as much as your most famous punchline. The next actor who is most hated to Jerry Seinfeld is a wild man who hit below the belt. Who is he? Let's find out. Number 4. Bobcat Goldthwait. Bobcat Goldthwait has never fit the mold of a typical stand-up comedian. From the very beginning of his career, he stood out like a lightning bolt against a gray sky. He was famous for his wild, unpredictable stage presence, screeching in a voice so shrill it almost sounded cartoonish, bounding around the stage with the energy of someone who'd had 10 espressos, and gleefully ignoring every rule about decency and decorum. But even for someone who thrived on shock and chaos, his relentless jabs at Jerry Seinfeld were unusually savage. Their clash wasn't just a brief exchange of insults or a minor difference of opinion. No, this was a feud that grew into a long, thorny grudge, one that would span decades and leave bruises on both men's reputations. The trouble began in the early 1990s, when Bobcat made an appearance on the Arsenio Hall Show, a popular late-night program known for its loose, party-like atmosphere. While most comedians would come on, crack a few safe jokes, and promote their latest project, Bobcat had something more incendiary in mind. Seizing the moment, he launched into a merciless rant aimed directly at Jerry Seinfeld's private life. With the audience shifting uncomfortably in their seats, Bobcat mocked Seinfeld's highly publicized relationship with Shoshana Lonstein, who was only 17 when Jerry, then approaching 40, began dating her. Bobcat didn't tiptoe around the controversy. He stomped right over the line, calling Jerry a creepy Scientologist guy dating teenage girls. The remark was so brutal and unexpected that it sent a jolt through the entertainment world. Overnight, headlines blared about Bobcat's accusations, and Seinfeld's carefully managed public image took a blow. What should have been just another run-of-the-mill late-night guest spot had turned into the opening salvo in a conflict that would rumble on for more than 20 years. Bobcat seemed to take a kind of gleeful satisfaction in keeping the fight alive. Whenever he had a chance, he would lob more verbal grenades in Seinfeld's direction. He seemed determined to pull back the curtain and expose what he saw as the hypocrisy in Jerry's wholesome persona. In interviews, Bobcat took every opportunity to dismiss Seinfeld's act as safe, dull, and unimaginative. To him, Seinfeld represented the most vanilla side of comedy. Someone who never took risks, but was rewarded anyway. And when Seinfeld released his 2002 documentary Comedian, which chronicled his attempt to build a brand new stand-up act after his mega-hit sitcom ended, Bobcat couldn't resist the chance to mock him again. The film showed Jerry struggling to find fresh material and feeling anxious when he failed to get laughs at small clubs. For most comics, this was a vulnerable glimpse behind the scenes, proof that even the most successful performers wrestle with insecurity. But Bobcat wasn't impressed. In 2003, he gave an interview dripping with sarcasm. Here's a guy worth $450 million crying because he can't get laughs. Dude, if it bums you out that much, don't go on stage. You could pay the audience to clap. To Bobcat, Seinfeld's angst seemed laughable. A spoiled millionaire grumbling about challenges that most struggling comedians would happily trade their lives to have. He saw Jerry as the ultimate example of someone completely out of touch with reality, a rich man who still expected sympathy for his first-world problems. Years rolled by, but the bitterness didn't fade. If anything, it simmered quietly, waiting for the next flare-up. Finally, in 2019, Jerry Seinfeld broke his long silence on the matter. He didn't exactly name Bobcat, but the clues were impossible to miss. During an episode of his Netflix show, Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, Seinfeld's usually smooth and confident demeanor turned noticeably icy when the subject of Bobcat came up. His face stiffened, his voice went flat, and he delivered a withering put-down. He has no talent. He's not funny. He does that stupid voice because he has no act. The producers bleeped out Bobcat's name in the final cut, perhaps hoping to soften the blow. But fans didn't need much help connecting the dots. Anyone who'd followed their history could see exactly who Jerry was talking about. Even after decades, the disgust in his tone made it clear that time hadn't dulled the hostility. Far from backing down, Bobcat appeared to relish the fact that he still occupied space in Seinfeld's head. He joked in later interviews that there was zero chance the two of them would ever bury the hatchet. In his eyes, their enmity was destined to continue indefinitely, like an old Western duel, only with fewer pistols and more barbed quips. He even dreamed up a new title to mock Seinfeld's celebrated Netflix series. With a sly grin, Bobcat quipped that Jerry's next project should be called Old Comedians in a Van Handing Out Candy at Playgrounds. That remark summed up his entire approach. Scathing, irreverent, and determined to puncture any sense of self-importance he felt Seinfeld clung to. The feud between Bobcat Goldthwait and Jerry Seinfeld never really cooled. It was more than just professional rivalry. It was a collision of two completely different philosophies about comedy and fame. On one side was Bobcat, the loud, unruly outsider who treated stand-up as a place to torch every sacred cow in sight. On the other side stood Seinfeld, the polished, mega-successful insider who believed in meticulously crafted material and a squeaky-clean public image. When their worlds collided, the sparks flew, and neither man ever seemed interested in putting out the fire. Even after all these years, it remains one of comedy's most fascinating, bizarre feuds. A story of ego, ethics, and two comedians who could never stand the sight of each other. Jerry has another colleague in the industry who he hates. Who is it? Let's dive into the details of their friendship that turned sour. Number 3. Julia Louis-Dreyfus. Jerry Seinfeld and Julia Louis-Dreyfus were an unforgettable duo who transformed television comedy with Seinfeld. Their effortless, natural banter and flawless timing made viewers feel like they shared a secret language. Each week, audiences were captivated by their chemistry and the way they brought clever humor and relatable absurdity to life. Watching them together felt like a pure, joyful escape. But time has moved on, and the glow of those days has dimmed. The two stars, once in complete harmony, now seem to stand on opposite sides of a widening gap neither could have predicted. What began as a simple difference in perspective has grown into a deeper conflict, a clash over what comedy should look like in a changing world. How far should comedians go when exploring edgy topics? At what point does a joke stop being harmless fun?
Well, I think I can do that. I believe I've played that role before to some critical acclaim. All right, let's go.
And start turning into something hurtful? And maybe the toughest question of all, who has the authority to decide where that invisible line is? Jerry has become one of the loudest critics of what he believes is a culture obsessed with political correctness. In his eyes, comedians today are forced to tiptoe around every subject, terrified that they'll accidentally offend someone. He feels this constant fear has drained comedy of its energy and spontaneity. In 2024, while promoting his nostalgic Netflix film about Pop-Tarts, a project that seemed to harken back to simpler times, Jerry's frustration erupted into plain view. During an interview with The New Yorker, he didn't bother softening his words. He argued that this PC crap was suffocating comedy, turning it bland and predictable. To him, the art form had lost its courage and boldness, but he didn't stop there. When he joined Bari Weiss on her Honestly podcast, Jerry sounded even more determined. He spoke passionately about the need to revive what he described as dominant masculinity. In his mind, comedy used to be fearless, a place where strong voices could challenge ideas without worrying about backlash. Now, he claimed, everything was too soft, too fragile, too ready to condemn any joke that stepped over an invisible boundary. He believed comedians were losing their nerve, too scared to say anything truly thought-provoking. While Jerry was making headlines with his blunt criticisms, Julia was quietly sharing a very different vision. She was busy promoting Tuesday, a thoughtful and emotionally layered film produced by A24. Compared to Jerry's playful Pop-Tart movie, Tuesday felt like an entirely different world, serious, introspective, and attuned to the complexities of human experience. As she spoke about her project, Julia revealed her own philosophy about comedy, one that gently but clearly stood in contrast to Jerry's. Julia's words were calm and considered, each one chosen with care. In one interview, she reflected, "To have an antenna about sensitivities is not a bad thing." She paused, allowing the meaning to sink in. It doesn't mean that all comedy goes out the window. With just that remark, she offered a quiet but firm counterpoint to Jerry's warnings. For Julia, being aware of people's feelings wasn't a threat to comedy. It was a way to show respect and acknowledge that society has evolved. She continued, admitting that when she heard complaints about political correctness, she felt uneasy. "It's a red flag," she said plainly, "because sometimes it means something else." Though she never called Jerry out by name, it was impossible not to see the connection. The timing, the steady conviction in her voice, it felt like she was pushing back against Jerry's view without needing to attack him directly. It was as if she was saying, just because the world is changing doesn't mean you get to dismiss it. Even more intriguing, Julia didn't see sensitivity as the biggest threat to comedy. She believed the real danger was something else entirely, the huge entertainment corporations that controlled nearly everything. In her opinion, when a few companies own most studios, streaming platforms, and networks, creativity is smothered under layers of bureaucracy and fear. Original voices get buried by executives who are more concerned about pleasing algorithms and focus groups than nurturing fresh ideas. To her, that's what is truly draining comedy of its originality. From the outside, their disagreement might look small, a couple of old friends with different takes. But in the world of comedy, tone and timing matter deeply. When Julia talked about red flags, it felt like she was slipping a hidden blade beneath polite words. Their opposing views couldn't be more striking. Jerry sees himself as the last defender of an older, wilder age when comedians said whatever they liked, no matter how shocking. He believes the current climate is weak and humorless, and he refuses to tone down his message. Julia, by contrast, feels that comedy should grow along with society. In her mind, that's not surrender. It's an opportunity to find richer, more thoughtful ways to connect with audiences. Their disagreement reveals something more profound about how each of them sees the world. For Jerry, comedy is a fortress to be defended. For Julia, it's a living thing that must adapt and evolve. This quiet divide has become a symbol of a bigger debate, one that asks whether comedy's future lies in clinging to the past or embracing change. What once was a beautiful creative partnership has settled into a careful, watchful distance. Their views have turned into a subtle contest over what comedy really means and how much it can bend before it breaks. Do you know that Jerry Seinfeld hates another comedian, which was ignited due to a silent rift over stolen muffin tops? Let's delve into the details. Number 2. Joe Rogan. At first glance, Jerry Seinfeld and Joe Rogan might seem to have little in common apart from their enormous success in stand-up comedy. On the surface, they occupy different corners of the entertainment world. Seinfeld, the clean-cut sitcom legend, and Rogan, the brash podcast juggernaut and UFC commentator. But if you look a bit more carefully, you'll find that their paths have quietly crossed and clashed for decades, even though they've never made a big public show of it. Both men share a love of fast cars, a long history of performing in smoky comedy clubs, and an undeniable influence over how millions of people think about comedy. Yet strangely, despite these overlapping interests and the fact that each has appeared on dozens of podcasts and shows, they have never appeared together. No shared interviews, no friendly banter, no surprise cameos, nothing. To people paying attention, that mutual silence has always felt a little suspicious, as if it pointed to something unspoken, simmering beneath the surface. The tension that had been mostly invisible finally became unmistakable in 2024, when Seinfeld made a guest appearance on Club Random with Bill Maher. During their conversation, Maher brought up the subject of classic interviewers and compared Joe Rogan to Larry King, praising Rogan's ability to draw people out in long-form discussions. Seinfeld didn't smile, didn't nod in agreement. He simply raised his hand ever so slightly and allowed the conversation to fizzle. He didn't say anything critical outright, but that tiny gesture, more a flick of the wrist than a proper wave, spoke volumes to viewers. Within hours, clips of that moment were making the rounds online. Fans analyzed the footage frame by frame, convinced Seinfeld's half-hearted reaction was no accident. Some called it a dismissive shrug, a polite but unmistakable way of saying, "Rogan, no thanks." Others argued Seinfeld was simply uninterested in the topic. But in the gossip-hungry world of social media, the prevailing interpretation was clear. Jerry was not a fan. The apparent coolness between them didn't appear out of nowhere. According to many who've followed their careers, the real origins of the rift stretch back to the late 1990s, when both men were already established names. At that time, Joe Rogan's good friend Kevin James, who would go on to star in The King of Queens, was working hard to secure a development deal with NBC. As part of his stand-up act, Kevin James often performed a bit about muffins. Specifically, he joked that everyone loves the muffin top, and nobody wants to eat the boring, dry bottom part. The routine was funny, relatable, and quickly became one of Kevin's signature pieces. Not long after Kevin was seen performing that joke on stage, Seinfeld, already the most popular sitcom on television, aired an episode called The Muffin Tops. The plot revolved around the exact same concept. Elaine decides to open a bakery that only sells the delicious muffin tops, leaving the stumps behind as worthless scraps. For Rogan and others close to Kevin James, the similarity felt too blatant to dismiss as coincidence. They believed that someone from Seinfeld's team had watched Kevin's set, liked the idea, and decided to transform it into an episode without credit. Though Seinfeld himself never publicly acknowledged the accusation, Rogan has never stopped insisting that the bit was lifted wholesale. He brought it up more than once, saying bluntly, "They watched him, they saw that bit, and then boom, it's in an episode." In comedy circles, stealing material is one of the gravest sins you can commit, a stain on your reputation that never fully washes out. Even if there was no lawsuit or official complaint, the suspicion remained, and so did the resentment. Over the years, this unspoken accusation quietly poisoned any chance of collaboration. Joe Rogan built the Joe Rogan Experience into the most influential podcast in the world, booking everyone from Elon Musk to Dave Chappelle. But Jerry Seinfeld never received an invitation. For his part, Seinfeld created Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, a show tailor-made for casual conversations with other comics. Yet Rogan never appeared in any episode. The omission always stood out, given Rogan's passion for cars and comedy. It was as though each man had drawn a circle around the other, refusing to step inside. Unlike many celebrity feuds, their friction never exploded into public name-calling or direct insults. You won't find viral clips of them cursing each other out or taking shots in interviews. Instead, their rift was a Cold War. No direct attacks, no obvious declarations of dislike, just a conspicuous absence of warmth. That is why the moment on Maher's show felt like a glimpse behind the curtain. One small, seemingly harmless gesture that hinted at years of buried tension. To outside observers, the shrug and the decades of avoidance say all that needs to be said, while they might never openly acknowledge their strained history. It's hard to ignore the way each man has quietly kept his distance. In a business where egos collide and grudges can last forever, sometimes the loudest message is the silence itself. The last on the list of the most hated comedians to Jerry Seinfeld is a legend who parted ways with Jerry Seinfeld due to disillusionment. Who is it? Let's find out. Number 1. Johnny Carson. For decades, The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson was the gold standard of late-night television. It wasn't just a program, it was a cultural institution. If you were a comedian, landing a spot on that stage wasn't just a goal. It was the milestone that said, "You've made it." Johnny Carson didn't just host a show. He held the keys to comedy success. Careers were launched, reputations built, and household names made, all under the glow of his studio lights. One of those inspired by Carson was a young Jerry Seinfeld. Like many up-and-coming comics of his time, Seinfeld looked up to Johnny with deep admiration. Watching Carson from home felt like watching royalty in action. The way Johnny timed his jokes, managed the crowd, and maintained total control of the room, it was masterful. For a time, Carson was more than just a TV host to Seinfeld. He was a hero, a mentor from afar. But that admiration didn't last forever. As Jerry matured in the comedy world and earned his own place in the spotlight, he began to see things differently. The image of Carson as a guiding light for young comics began to fade, replaced by a more troubling realization. Behind the polished smile and witty banter was a man who, in Seinfeld's eyes, held back more than he gave. Though Carson wielded the kind of influence that could uplift fresh talent and help shape the next generation of comedians, he often chose not to. Seinfeld noticed how Johnny seemed detached from the very people who looked up to him most. He didn't offer much encouragement. He wasn't known for mentoring or supporting new comics trying to break through. He remained distant, almost cold, like the idea of nurturing talent was somehow beneath him. This aloofness might have been brushed off by some as part of Carson's mystique, but to Jerry, it was disheartening. Even more troubling, though, was something he found much harder to ignore. Jerry began to suspect that Carson wasn't just indifferent. He was also quietly lifting material. According to Seinfeld, Johnny had a subtle habit of borrowing jokes and bits from rising comedians who were often just thrilled to share the same stage. But instead of acknowledging them or giving credit, Johnny would later perform the jokes himself, as if they were his own creations. He would present the material seamlessly during his monologues, cloaked in that familiar charm that had long won over America. For someone like Seinfeld, who holds comedy as a sacred craft built on truth, originality, and hard work, this was a deep betrayal. Comedy is about honesty, Jerry once said in an interview. It's about putting in the work. If you're taking someone else's bit, that's the worst thing you can do. He didn't say it with anger. He wasn't out to destroy a legacy, but his words carried the weight of someone who had once held deep respect and now felt quietly let down. While Carson was alive, Seinfeld chose not to speak publicly about these feelings. He kept his criticisms private, perhaps out of deference to the legend, or maybe because he knew how delicate the balance was between truth and public perception. But in later years, Jerry became more open about the disillusionment he felt. The once great figure who had inspired him no longer held that place of honor in his mind. Now, when Seinfeld talks about Johnny Carson, his voice carries none of the awe you'd expect from someone who once idolized the late-night king. There's no reverence, no nostalgic glow, just a calm and clear sense of disappointment, a subtle, enduring sadness that the man he once admired from afar had failed to live up to the greatness he symbolized. It's a story that speaks volumes, not just about Carson, but about the difficult truths that often come with growing up in any field, especially one as cutthroat and personal as comedy. Idols sometimes fall. Heroes are human, and sometimes, the closer you get to greatness, the more cracks you start to see. In the end, Johnny Carson remains a towering figure in television history. No one can deny the impact he had. But through Jerry Seinfeld's lens, we also see a more complicated picture. A man who had the chance to shape the future of comedy with generosity, but chose silence instead. A man who inspired millions, but disappointed those who came too close. It's a reminder that legacies are rarely one-dimensional. Even kings have shadows. So, which of these comedians do you think Jerry Seinfeld